The Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. Happy New Year. Happy 2025. We made it to 2025. It's good to have you here. Here where we are living in the future. 2025 sounds like it's supposed to be very far from now. 2050. There's a lot of climate milestones or like deadlines that we have to affect more positive impact on the planet by 2050 and environmental feedback loops that we expect to see. So 2050 from 2025 seems very, very close to me. You know, from 2020 even, it still seemed pretty far away, but 25 years is not very far. So, you know, not to bring a dark cloud into this first episode of the year, but like, come on, look around. Reality is reality. We all know what we're facing down this year and in the coming years. And so this episode is devoted to a particular small section of the introduction of my new book, Spells for the Apocalypse. That book is coming out January 14th from W.W. Norton, the imprint called Countryman Press. If you're a regular listener of the podcast and you haven't pre-ordered, man, I'll tell you, that is one way you can let me know that you like what you've heard or I've somehow been a positive influence, because pre-orders really do mean the world to an author, like in very tangible ways. Pre-orders really make a difference, because when the publisher sees that there's like buzz about something, then they will start to support their own book. You wouldn't think it works that way, but that is how it works. So the subtitle of my book is Practical Magic for Turbulent Times. And in this episode, I'm bringing back my husband, Ruben, to discuss something that we created that we call the Ritual of the Marriage Moon. Literally, it's like practical magic that we use during a very turbulent time in our marriage. And as I said, it massively helps an author to pre-order their book. And just like this episode, I think is going to be a highly shareable episode. Spells for the Apocalypse is a highly giftable book. And like, so surely you know someone with a birthday in 2025, right? Or like someone who's in a troubled relationship, or someone who's struggling with climate anxiety or dread around the political landscape and the rise of fascism in the world, right? Like, surely you know someone, or you wouldn't be listening to this episode or this show. So let me just explain real quick what's in the book. There are 13 chapters for the tough emotions that afflict us in collapse times, things like anxiety, overwhelm, burnout. These are the chapter titles. Each affliction has a short essay on the neuroscience, the attachment issues involved, the somatic experience of the trauma involved, just like some practical evidence-based information about how we might deal with that affliction, that emotion. And then there's a detailed ritual to help process that emotional state. And these rituals are based in my animism, my folk magic, my witchcraft, and also in somatic trauma recovery. Then in part 3, there are 13 chapters with practices that support resilience in times of great peril. So these are like the developmental tasks on the psycho-spiritual level, the developmental task that would foster resourcefulness and agency in spite of circumstances. So these chapters are titled like acknowledgement, awe, celebration, wholeness, and then they each have a ritual or practice. So this is a book for collective collapse, like the American election, like what's happening in Canada politically that's emulating our neighbors to the south, and other forms of collective collapse, like folks suffering the aftermath of climate emergencies. And it's also for personal collapse, like bereavement, divorce, friendship breakups, illness, isolation, financial distress, loss, all that kind of stuff. So this book was like forged in the crucible of my own life and the life of my clients. And it's based in the work that we do in the Numinous Network every month. But it's also like a friendly champion of your survival. It's something for you and whoever you gift it to hold on to when it feels like the world is falling apart. Okay, so later on, I have a little other thing to say about ordering through Amazon. I'm going to save that for the end. For now, I want you to hear how ritual and practice really can make a difference in your life in the biggest of ways, in the most profound of ways, in the most long lasting of ways. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Ruben about how a ritual crafted in desperation really did save our marriage. Welcome back to the show, Ruben. It's been a while.
It has been a while. It's good to be here with you.
Mhm. We're all cozy in our bed right now
Yep.
in the RV. There's snow on the ground. The sun is out, so everything is sparkly and white. The mountain at our back, kind of to our side, seems really pretty right now.
hmm
You look nice in the morning light.
Thank you.
Uh, and I hope this is like the best sound we've ever had. I hope that's like the big benefit of RV living is that we finally get a good conversation between two people recorded with the technology that we have, because it's kind of like being in first class in an airplane, the way this room is set up with like, for listeners, it had, what would you call this? Like an accordion curtain
Yeah.
made out of like some kind of, I don't know,
Yeah.
plastic woven material.
Yeah.
And
That separates the bedroom from the bathroom.
yeah, by a mere 2 inches.
Yeah.
And we have this like very high platform bed because in an RV, they're trying to put storage everywhere. So there's like storage underneath. And then we have all these layers. So
Yeah.
our bed is like, I don't know, 4 feet off the ground.
It's not 4 feet, but it's 2.5 feet.
It's
It's thigh high.
It's thigh high, and it has like it's on another little step that's 4 inches high. So, so I kind of feel like
We're ensconced.
yeah, we are ensconced in our bedroom right now. Do you want to give people a little life update? What are we doing here in the RV in the middle of winter?
Well, a lot of things have happened. We have we've for a long time we've been trapped in the real estate mess that faces so many people in Canada and I don't know, perhaps in the US. I don't know to what extent. But real estate is crazy expensive, either to buy or increasingly to rent.
Like
So,
our house,
uh-huh,
which was less than 1,000 square feet,
uh-huh,
and which was you put a lot of work into it, but
yeah,
it was over 100 years old. It was like we made it. We brought the character to it. You did a lot of stuff. Our landlord let you um upgrade it, but it was nothing fancy.
no,
It had a rat problem,
yeah.
and that house would be selling for, what would you estimate right now?
Oh God, I would imagine eight hundred or $900,000, I would think. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet he could get 1 million for it. It's only technically a 1 bedroom with two small office like
And it's got a
sort of
very
dens.
strange lot.
Yeah.
So, which is problematic for developers. But the developers are making do because they're buying the other two lots he owns, so they're buying, I don't know, 7 bedrooms. They're buying four, six, yeah, 7 units from him. 3 houses, seven
From our
units
landlord.
from our landlord.
And so we were rent evicted.
Yeah,
Yeah, or develop evicted.
develop evicted.
Yeah.
Um, So, we saw that coming and you spent a year looking at purchasing, then you spent about a year looking for rentals.
Mhm.
And this is all just, we've been wanting to get out of the city for a long time to have more space so we could have livestock and more animals.
And things got pretty acute with our kid. And I just realized that after 10 years of I went through our Google Calendar and I averaged out how many therapy and doctor's appointments we'd had for our kid in the last decade. And it averaged two a month. And I did a one pager for our doctor and naturopath and care team of like, here's the symptoms that I would see, and here's the specialist or, a therapeutic intervention we would do. And after a decade, it's not getting better, it's only getting more complex. And this disabled, autistic, anxious, queer, trans kid
Mhm.
needs an autistic lifestyle.
Mhm.
So, low sensory input, fewer people, and a very low degree of change. And so
So we
when
needed to get out of the city.
we had to get out of the
And
city.
we need to get out of the city to a place where we could kind of have multiple dwelling units
Hmm.
and a bit of a small holding lifestyle.
And we have a dog, our kid has a dog.
Hmm.
So it was impossible. I could not find anything, never mind affordable, even if we paid another $1,000 a month in rent, I
Hmm.
couldn't find a place that would accommodate all of us
Yeah.
and dogs and certainly not the small holding, small crofting
Yeah.
homesteader lifestyle that is in alignment with our collapse
And for
plans.
someone who dreams of horses as you do.
Yeah.
So then also, I'd been going to visit my parents who live in the Okanagan, on the land on which I was raised. Um, I'd been going yearly or more before pandemic, just to help with kind of larger projects. And but through pandemic, we didn't really travel. We didn't own a car, we didn't want to fly, didn't want to take the bus, so we didn't really travel. So we finally bought a car and visited my parents, and I was quite astonished at how much capacity they'd lost. So they're both in their early 80s now. They've been living here for 50 years, 55 years or something almost. And they're in their early 80s. They've lost a lot of capacity and
They've both had pretty major surgery,
joint
joint
replacements.
replacements,
Yeah,
and they've had, some heart stuff, some
yeah,
breathing stuff. They both have
mhm,
uh, some signs of failing health
yeah,
that are just chronic.
yeah. Um, and so a bunch of things lined up well, and some things lined up not so well. So, what lined up well is that this land has space. There are a couple of unfinished dwellings on it that I can renovate, and hopefully my parents can live in one and we can live in another. There's plenty of land. There's a creek which we have deeded water rights to. Um, and there's a great deal of material that's being collected on the land as a resource
There
to
are artifacts
there are many
scattered across
artifacts.
the
Yeah.
land.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're making
Uh,
it sound pretty good here,
yeah.
Ruben.
And well, I think the bad thing is that it's a current wildfire zone and Canada's most arid area. So in terms of climate change and collapse, I
It's
I
bad.
don't love that.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's and then of course there's quite a bit, I think in people of my parents' generation, neurodivergence was ignored
Hmm.
or punished.
Hmm.
And so there's quite a bit of untherapized neurodivergence, um, which is a challenge.
There's also a tremendous amount of trauma and
Hmm.
unresolved material
Yeah.
that they feel that they have dealt with, which is so evidently untrue.
Yeah.
What else is hard about here, Ruben? Making it sound so idyllic.
Uh, well, I think the move here has been like setting up RVs is like building a small city,
Mhm.
where we need sewer and water and electricity and internet. So all
There's no
that's,
power to where we put these RVs,
yeah,
so
there was no power. There was, we still are pumping our RV tanks full from a garden hose every few days,
for water. Yeah.
so
And just getting the power pole up here
It took a year.
was, yeah, took a year. It took tens of thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
which they would only accept cash.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say cash, but like you had to have payment. You couldn't use like credit card or
Yeah.
with the utilities company. So now we have the Carmen Memorial Power Pole, which
Hmm.
is great. Power's up here, but yeah, you are the mayor of the East Upper Flat,
Hmm.
and you have had to learn about engineering, about laying fiber optic internet cable, like
Hmm.
just about everything
Yeah.
to make an RV for us and an RV for our kid livable year round. Because how cold does it get here in the winters?
Well, last winter it got minus 35 for a brief period here.
Mhm.
That's unusual,
But it can
but it
happen.
can happen.
Okay, but getting real here for a minute, Ruben,
Hmm.
why do we even live in RVs in the first place?
Yeah, so as I said, there's I think some generational consequences. There is my both my parents are neurodivergent, have trauma, generational or otherwise. Like my mom grew up in the 40s, was a girl in the 40s, and so she has a great deal of anger at the patriarchy. Um, so there's trauma, there's neurodivergence. They moved here as a coping strategy in a world that didn't have therapy for
Mhm.
stuff like that. Um, and some of the coping strategies are now maladaptive, let's say. And so, yeah, so there's lots of artifacts everywhere on the land, in the houses. Both houses are unfinished. Um,
They were, I guess we didn't say this. They've
mhm,
also had some really bad luck. Your
mhm,
house burned down when
yeah,
you were 8 years old. You're 55 now,
yeah.
54. And so uh, when you say unfinished, you mean unfinished since they were built
Since the
40
80s.
years
Well,
ago.
the first one was started in the early 80s, and then the next one is 20 years old or something like that. So,
Mhm.
um, which is much more finished, but still unfinished.
Mhm.
Um,
Because it's just too much.
yeah, it's too much, I think more than it being too much for two people or more than it being too much physically, it's too much for their neurodiversity.
Mhm.
And that is, has been untherapized and uncoached.
Mhm.
So to help cope with that.
Mhm.
So that means that you and I, despite the fact there being, um, you know, 3,500 square feet of living space or something, don't have a house to live in.
Mhm.
And so that will be my project over the next 2 or 3 years is to renovate houses.
Mhm.
So,
And we knew this was going to happen in a way. We had come here. You're an only child.
mhm,
We were on vacation here, quote unquote vacation. We were visiting family here 8, maybe 9 years ago.
mhm,
And I remember, it used to be really difficult for me. I would come and I would have, little small panic attacks in the middle of the night. My flight response was extremely high.
mhm.
I'm estranged from my family. That's how I've dealt with the
Yeah,
unresolved
that's the coping
addiction issue.
mechanism.
Yeah, that's my coping mechanism with all of the unresolved trauma and addiction and abuse in
Mhm,
my family. That's not what's going on here.
mhm,
And you were very clear that, like, you are going to need to care for your parents, and part of your um, commitment was to be with them. They weren't leaving the land.
mhm,
And I would kind of freak out because it's so overwhelming.
mhm. Yeah.
And I had about 8 years ago this like awareness of like, we have to come here.
Mhm,
This is where we're going to end up.
mhm.
And then I spent 8 years trying desperately, like a cat trapped in a shower, trying to like find other ways for us to be able to support your parents, but not actually have to try to be here with all the, let's just call it unresolved material,
Mhm.
physical, emotional, and otherwise.
Yeah.
And then, things happening with the world meant that that just was not working out for us. Victoria, I don't know if listeners realize that Victoria is not as perhaps well known as Vancouver, but Vancouver is as expensive or more than Toronto, and Victoria is almost considered like a suburb of Vancouver. For there's a direct flight to Silicon Valley. You
Hmm.
know, it's one of the most expensive places to live, like in the
In the world.
world.
Yeah.
And so it just wasn't working out for us, even though my family had been in southern Vancouver. Oh, so my people are island people, and it's just been I spent a year of lament very consciously saying goodbye to all of the places that raised me. I just really didn't want to leave, but here we are. And I've been telling people it's taken me 8 years to become the person I needed to be able to make this move.
Hmm.
And so circumstances conspired to give that a deadline. Once again, I knew before anyone else
Yep.
said anything, before there were whispers, I could just feel that house that we lived in kind of releasing us. And it felt awful. It was like a series of calamitous things. And then I just kind of knew I was like, our landlord is going to sell and he's going to develop this place, and we have to have a plan. And those 2 years of looking, I came up empty. And so I was like, okay. And it was actually our kid, V, who had this dream when they were in grade 12. They're turning 21 now. They were like, I think I just want to live like in an RV or a trailer on some land somewhere. Like, and I don't know if they said, could we go to Ed and Kathy's? But it was like that could be an option. And I was like, no, no, people can't live in RVs. Like, you really don't want to live in an RV all year round. But then the more kind of desperate my search got, the more I was like, oh my God, I guess we have to start researching how to live in an RV all year round. And uh, downsizing, buying a sea can to put all our stuff in, and just accepting like, okay, we've got a couple of years of this because it's going to be a really monumental task trying to get the place done. And so then when we were visiting, we did a cool thing though. So I was like, hey, let's get this Airbnb that is an RV. This woman was like advertising an RV on Airbnb in Summerland, which is your hometown here, the closest small town.
Hmm.
And so they pulled it to the land here, and we got to stay in it over Thanksgiving. And I was like, okay, let's just see all three of us in an RV. Like, what is it actually like? Can we imagine this? And so we did that. So we were visiting your parents last Thanksgiving, 2023. And your mom was like, I don't know, she was mumbling about something in the kitchen she didn't like, or something like that. I don't know what it was. And I looked at her and said, Kathy, would you like us to renovate your house for you to just finish it? And she looked at me so blankly, I couldn't interpret it. And she went, well, yes. I was like, okay, okay. And so then that began the conversations of like, so should we get serious about this intergenerational living thing? Okay, so the long story short, that was the short story long, is really about that 8 years. It
Yeah.
took 8 years to accept our fate
Hmm.
and be able to kind of do the inner work required to go, okay, this is what we have to do. We have to like move to a wildfire zone
Hmm.
because that's the land that is paid for and available to us. Free 99. That's what we can afford. And so enough of the like prepper fantasies of like, we're going to go to a place that somehow got the environmental changes that we would prefer. It's taken a long time.
Yeah, I think it took you 8 years to come to grips with living on this land as well as doing the inner work. Um, I had a pretty strong idea 8 years ago that this was kind of our only available path. And so it was just the inner work for me that was necessary in order to, I felt this was our only available path, but I was still not the person I needed to be in order for us to survive in our marriage and hopefully thrive here.
That's the big thing, right? This introduces even more duress
Hmm.
when it comes to,
Oh my God, more duress.
yeah, just let's try to maintain a hetero marriage
Hmm.
while we are going through this sometimes pretty agonizing
Yeah.
and really always physically taxing,
Hmm.
really exhausting,
Very,
emotionally laden undertaking. That does introduce quite a bit more pressure on the marriage.
yeah. I will say I do feel better in my body here. So I feel I am more resourced in some ways. I have more challenges,
Hmm.
but I have more resources, which is good for me.
Hmm.
So,
I can see it. Like I can imagine that for me, but because I feel so displaced.
mhm.
I feel like the land is really trying to woo me. It wants to love me well, and I want to love it back, but it's not my home. Of course, the astrocartographer was one of the things that helped me realize, okay, I can do this.
Mhm.
Because basically, astrology is my religion. And so if my astrologer tells me, I'm like, okay, this is what we're doing now. We had an astrocartography session. You had to be there. For folks who don't know what that is, it's when an astrologer who has very specialized training um, kind of pretends and maps as though you were born in every spot on Earth at the time that you were born. And then it kind of looks at uh, these different lines that are more um, fortunate for you. And the way the astrocartographer explained it to us was we were like, okay, here's the geolocation of the land. Is this going to be like better or worse for Carmen, better or worse for Ruben? And she said, well, for Ruben, it's great because Ruben was born there. And in this model, it's kind of like here is the sun rising when you are born, and you spend your entire life chasing the sun until you come back to the place where the sun sets. And if you come back to the place where you began, you're like fulfilling your ultimate aligned path. So this is like going to be a great move for Ruben, who gets to really step into his destiny of nourishing the people he loves through food and drink and uh, agriculture, growth, all this kind of stuff. She said drink specifically, which I found very interesting. But um, so this is great for Ruben. And then she said, well, Carmen, with your Mars and Cancer, you're always going to have something to complain about with home. But home is wherever Ruben is, because in your chart, Ruben is your home. And so you should just buy a rooster to become like the focus of all your ire. And then your Mars energy can be like worked out with a rooster instead of like kind of free reign all over the land. And just know that Ruben is your home. And so once she said that, it just really, it like resonated in my body as true and was like, okay, then I guess we're moving. So that's how that happened. But we're actually here to talk about one of the like Hail Marys, one of the key pieces in our marriage. This is a little bit of an epilogue to the Portrait of a Marriage miniseries that we did, which was an update on the Portrait of a Marriage blog post from 2017. And it's actually going to make a little appearance in my upcoming book, my next book, Spells for the Apocalypse, and that is the Ritual of the Marriage Moon. So we're not exactly sure when this started. It's
Yeah.
like now 2019, 2018.
It's so weird, in 2020 time got very strange, and it's hard to know when actually anything was anymore. Like was 5 years ago was 2020.
Mhm.
And so something that happened 5 years ago in our marriage may actually have been 10 years ago. It's just I'm not clear on when we did this.
But we know it was after I'd done my somatic attachment training
Uh-huh.
because what had happened was I went and got all this somatic attachment repatterning training with
Mhm.
Diane Poole Heller, very much changed the trajectory of our relationship as
Yes.
I was so desperate because
Mhm.
I just thought I'm so done with this marriage, but I'm like I'm not I'm not going to say I'm not a quitter, but I'm somebody who will like I will throw everything at it because I want to be right, you know? Because I'm like I will not be wrong about this, and so I'm going to do every kind of work, every kind of therapeutic intervention. I'm going to get the education. I trained in attachment and trauma and was like, I will be the one who tried everything to make this marriage work.
Mhm.
Emerged from that being like, yeah, I guess I have quite a lot of work to do, even though I've been doing a lot of work
Mhm.
and was trying to presence more secure attachment for you.
Mhm.
And you were doing the same for me. It made it easier for you to hear that I was like patriarchy. And like, so we'd been doing that work then for a couple years, I think.
Mhm.
And it's not that it didn't make a difference. It really did make a difference in our
Mhm.
relationship.
Yeah.
But after a couple years of like really working the principles of contact nutrition and secure attachment, we were still struggling.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like it was the all the work we were doing for the other person, it had this sensation of being like a tall, cold glass of water on in the middle of a hot, blazing, barren desert. Like you came back from Dare, and that's exactly what it
From the
felt like.
training.
I just felt like this was oxygen. I felt like I could live again. And then, but then it goes away because, the work that we were doing did not just overnight transform us into totally different people. So it took practice, lots of application.
Yeah, it's that like in a somatic cycle where we talk about like, okay, there's lots of pressure building up for whatever it is. I'm speaking just generally about
Hmm.
the somatic cycle here, where, okay, pressure, 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 then you need to discharge.
Hmm.
The discharge can feel good, you start to settle, but then it's usually disorienting
Hmm.
because you're like, oh my God, I got a bit of relief, but I don't even fucking know what to do with that.
Yeah.
And it's hard to find stability. And so you kind of need a chance to rest in it
Hmm.
and rest in that state of well-being before you move on to, okay, now let's task, or like that sort of victorious pronking,
Hmm.
which is like the sort of the victory dance that we do when we're like, ha ha, huzzah, we survived. And so in the larger scale of that, it was like, okay, we relieved the pressure and we were starting to settle, but it was still very discombobulating. And we were inconsistent in our practice because our nervous systems hadn't had enough time to like be different and
Hmm.
try different things and have it be successful and then integrate. And frankly, I will say, well, I I still felt that there was so much patriarchy in our marriage and that overtly or covertly, even with all this other work, whether it was said or unsaid, it still felt like the
Hmm.
problem was about sex. And I was so fucking tired of that. Like, it just felt transparently patriarchal to me. And I
Hmm.
was just like, you know what? I'm doing all this work and it's not translating
Hmm.
into my partner being able to actually just receive my love and care and like rest in it. The demand is still there, it's still escalating.
Hmm.
And we just hadn't had a chance to like practice the things.
Hmm.
So if there's like one thing we want to share with people, we kind of talked about this in Portrait of a Marriage, but like most therapy overemphasizes communication.
Hmm.
We had great communication. We had like next level very good, clear communication. We
Hmm.
had the skills, we had the techniques, we had the tools, we were
Hmm.
doing the things, we had polyvagal awareness, we had, we had all of that stuff, but we hadn't had enough years under our belt of practicing being different for it to become a truly corrective experience. So our
Hmm.
resentments were still lingering,
Hmm.
we're still there.
Uh, yeah, so I know we're going to talk about the resentments and how critical that feeling was. But I guess the thing that I want to stress about the communication is that a lot, when we say we had good communication, we mean that we could use words well in a sentence. But I think in a lot of ways, we didn't actually know what we wanted, what we needed, So, and I think that's just a huge problem that actually identifying what the problem is, the real problem,
Mhm.
not just the like, oh, he doesn't bloody blah, like whatever, like kind of surface complaint that you read about in Good Housekeeping magazine, like that's not the thing. Communicating about that is not the thing. The thing was much deeper. And so the tall, cool glass of water, it was actually just like a sip. It was like we gave each other a sip of water.
Every once in a while.
Yeah,
Well, I
and
shouldn't say once in a while. Every day at regular times.
yeah,
We got some
we
sips
got
of
some
water
sips
to
of
be like,
water.
look,
Yeah,
water exists and isn't it
yeah,
refreshing? And
and
now do you have water for me?
yeah, and what that did was it was like getting your skin peel off because it's like, oh my God, this water is so good, and then it's like, yeah, well, I'm taking the glass away. You
Yeah, I would
know?
like you to give me water then.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too is that piece that you said about like misattributing
Hmm.
what the source is of what we actually want. Like
Hmm.
sex would be the thing,
Hmm.
but it's not really.
No.
It's like it was such a deeper sense of being loved and lovable,
Hmm.
and
Attachment.
it's attachment. And so I could say the words of that. I can, da, 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 I
Hmm.
can do all the things that I think are going to make you feel loved and lovable,
Hmm.
but that's the major disconnect that I think people have is people think this is the problem. It's money or it's sex or it's the way they
Hmm.
whatever,
Household chores or
household chores,
yeah,
lack of emotional labor on his part, da, da, da,
hmm,
all these things, right?
yeah,
And so we think that those are the issues. And I'm not saying they aren't
they are.
exacerbating, they
Yeah.
absolutely are. But what's underneath is so much deeper.
Hmm.
And I think for me anyway, patriarchy is the main problem. And I
Hmm.
would say in most relationships, because men are so shaped by
Hmm.
being blind to attachment needs, and it gets projected onto an individual woman. And
Hmm.
again, we're talking about our hetero
Yeah.
situation, but it gets
Yeah.
projected onto an individual person. And patriarchy creates all this shaping around the expectation that your sense of being loved and lovable
Hmm.
is going to come from your partner and it's going to look like certain things.
Yeah.
And so, we were working it and we
Hmm.
were aware, we talked about patriarchy all the time,
Hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. But we still had these resentments and it was getting so fractious and so that just made it even worse, right? It's
Uh,
like, okay, so now we must need to get a divorce because we have all the information, we've got the skills, we've got the techniques, we're doing the things,
hmm.
and it's still extremely fractious,
Hmm.
right? Like we could get into conflict pretty intensely, pretty quickly,
Yeah.
because by then we'd done everything and we were exhausted.
Hmm.
And I'm pretty sure it was you that just said, because when I get to the point where I'm throwing in the towel, you kind of like your functioning really rises up because you're like, no, 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 that
Hmm.
can't happen. And I got to that apathetic place of
Hmm.
just like, whatever, Ruben, that kind of stuff, whatever you want. When I give up, oh yeah, I'm here. I'm not giving up. I'm with you, babe. But when I
Those were
start,
bad times.
they were bad times. And when I start getting apathetic and just going, whatever you want, Ruben, when I'm compliant, you know that there's something wrong because I've checked out. Yeah. So you were like, is there something we can do? Is there like a ritual we can do? Because we were so desperate. It
Hmm.
was the Hail Mary.
Hmm.
And so I was like, well, I think we should just give this to the moon because we need something really big
Hmm.
that can just take all of our gripes and all of our grievances. And we should just every full moon I don't remember how we came up with this idea of just like listing them,
Hmm.
but we came up with this idea of each of it. We had one big, huge piece of paper, and we had a column, Carmen's needs, Ruben's needs, or wishes or desires or something like that. And then I would write down, here's all the things I want. And mine were like, I want you to learn how to cook more meals because I don't want to eat your fucking rice and bean burritos every day or whatever. I want you to like become a more adventurous cook. And then I want you to cook half the time. And I want that to include grocery shopping. And it was like very, very kind of detailed stuff. I wish we had it. It's somewhere packed. We still have it. We use the same piece of paper for every ritual of
Hmm.
the marriage moon on the full moon. Yours were like, and this is so funny because I've heard this from a few different girlfriends who've used this technique. It's
Hmm.
like, it kind of pissed me off to see what yours were because they still felt like they were so much around sex and intimacy. And I was like, this is what one girlfriend said, his things wouldn't even make it into my top 100 of things we need to do to keep our marriage together. Like, fuck his things, you know? So I also was like, are you fucking kidding me when I saw what yours were? I can't remember what yours were, but I don't know how transparent we want to be about what your requests
I,
were.
I don't actually remember
Oh,
like
okay.
really any of it. So
There, I know the sex ones were up top, and I was like, God damn it! Like, um, and so what we would do is I would buy a nice bottle of cheap bubble.
well, so but that first time, okay, so the first time we had the bottle of cheap bubble,
Hmm.
it was the full moon,
Yeah,
and we wrote down our full list of grapes,
yeah.
and then the other person read it.
Yeah. And they were, when I say gripes, it wasn't just like, oh, I had this complaint about you. It's like, this is my need.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so it was like, I have these needs. Here's my list.
Hmm.
And then we would read our thing to the other person.
Hmm.
And the other person needed to just listen
Hmm.
and not respond with
No
anything.
argument. Yeah.
No argument, no justification, no complaint, no
Yeah.
critique. Just, okay, so that is the need you have.
Yeah.
And the role of the listener was to literally be like, I got the memo.
Hmm.
Like, yes, I heard you. So they were very present, listening,
Hmm.
reading, hearing all that stuff, and could not respond. At the very end, we had our statement, which was, I trust that you want to meet these needs. And when you can, you will. And for now, I give it to the moon. So that was the like crux of it. We
And
had
then
to
we
be,
rolled up the paper
yeah,
and tied it with a ribbon
yeah,
and put it away until the next full
yeah.
moon,
And
and
we
we
tucked
drank
a
some
little
bubble.
rosemary in there because it's our like medicine for our marriage. And we drank the bubble under the full moon on our
Yeah.
front steps.
For a while, we kept this fairly like I don't think it was on the altar, but it
It
was
was in our bedroom. Yeah.
altered.
Yeah. Yeah. We had an altar in our bedroom and we
Uh,
did lay it on the altar for quite a bit of
yeah,
that time.
for a few months.
Yeah. It took, and we did this for over a year.
Hmm.
We did it every month. And then I think after a year, we might have skipped a month and it kind of tapered. But the key part of the spell work here, the magic was I trust that you want to meet these needs. And when you can, you will.
Hmm.
So it was like you had so much going on at work. It was such an awful time for you at work. Uh, I had so much going on. And it was like, I am doing everything I can to show you how much I love you and I'm devoted to you and make you happy.
Hmm.
And I can't do these things that you want. They're
Hmm.
just, I fucking can't. But there were some things we could do.
Hmm.
Like
Well,
maybe you want to share.
the very next day, I started cooking.
Yes.
So the history of this, folks, is that I actually spent much of my life working in restaurants, so I can cook. However, Carmen is has the Grand Diplôme from Le Cordon Bleu in Paris, France. Uh, and and also like you get tired of food easily. Like
Mhm.
I like to big batch. You don't.
I don't like eating the
Uh,
same thing 2 meals in a row.
yeah. So it was pretty intimidating. So, at the beginning of our relationship, I was like, I will do all the dishes. You do the cooking.
Hmm.
Um, and it stayed that way for,
Oh,
7 or 8 years
yeah.
until this,
8 or 9,
yeah.
yeah, like almost a decade.
And so, but then you put that on the list for
Yeah,
the
of just
first
like
ritual of the
it's so
marriage. Man.
much more than just cooking.
Yeah.
It's the shopping, it's
Mhm.
the, mental load of what's in the fridge and when
Yeah.
and who and all that stuff. And I was like, you know what?
Yeah.
I fucking want you to do
Yeah.
that.
And so
It's taking
like
the
the
joy out
very
of it.
next day, I
Yeah.
began doing that.
Yeah, and you started getting very serious in your Ruben way about like collecting recipes that I would like and just trying them out. And at first it was stressful. At first, we were eating at 9:30 at night and it
Yeah.
was like 2 hours of prep
Yeah.
but you know what? My job was to be like, wow, look at him. He is doing the thing on my list. Like the
Mhm.
moon has favored me with a husband
Yeah.
who is willing. And I think this is a key thing is not everybody can trust that their partner actually wants to meet their need.
Hmm.
There are people, uh, how many of my clients are women with just absolutely self-absorbed men who have no concept of patriarchy and are not interested, honestly, or will pay lip service to it, or will learn just enough to be able to manipulate and massage situations to come across and appear as a sensitive attuned partner, but actually ultimately guess what, she still ends up,
It's transactional.
yeah, it's transactional. They're not an equal partner in
Hmm.
parenting, and they actually just don't really want to be.
Hmm.
And so not everybody can trust that their partner is really putting their, and honestly, uh, as a recovering avoidant, I can say this, uh, because of course it's not just men, not all men, uh, but I think a lot of avoidant folks do think that if I'm just keeping the bills paid and the shelter and I'm keeping that person safe, it's
Hmm.
so much better than I ever got.
Hmm.
And that is the true expression of love.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of like, what more do you want? Well, if a person doesn't have the ability to interocept
Hmm.
and feel what's happening in their body and identify emotions and the needs underneath them, of course, having the bills paid and a nice place to live and
Hmm.
kids in a good school feels like ultimate security. But once us avoidant folks start learning how to feel and start learning the stuff underneath, it's like, oh yeah, I have this much deeper need, and now I have capacity to attune and empathize and want to respond, a genuine desire to want to respond to your need for secure attachment, attunement, etc. Like that vulnerability isn't something I just want to fix. It's something that I actually want to attend to and attune to. I'm not trying to like make that go away. So it makes it easier for me to be like, oh, you have this need and I actually want to attend to it. It feels good to me to attend to the need, not just try to like fix the situation and solve problems and, make people not feel upset with me anymore. It's a much deeper sense of wanting to be close to you.
So there's two things in that I want to talk about. So to help me remember. So that I want to touch on that second one of the attending, wanting to attend to something.
Hmm.
I think is super important. But the first part, I just wanted to say this belief that when they can, they will
Hmm.
is really core to our worldview and is like I first thought about it. It was written about by Bruce Alexander in The Roots of Addiction in Free Market Societies, where he talks about addiction and says, addiction doesn't come about because people are losers or failures or weak or stupid or sinful or anything like that.
Yeah, have a fallible character.
Yeah, it's because, like in that case, he's saying fundamentally because they have lost attachment. Like
Hmm.
they're not attached to place, they're not attached to culture, they're not attached in loving relationships. So they are rootless people, and they are medicating
Hmm.
with various drugs.
Hmm.
Um, so that worldview of it's that no, people are fundamentally good. Fundamentally, every human being is fundamentally good, and
If they could do better, they would
and
do
if they
better.
could do better, they would do better. That
Hmm.
is I think that's a real key part of our approach to this, of our
Hmm.
worldview. And then that desire to attend, I just, I I didn't want to attend to you. For all of my adult life, I approached relationships very transactionally. And I didn't want to just do gratuitously nice things for you. Like I was good at gifts and stuff. I got
Hmm.
Christmas gifts and birthday gifts, like I did provide care and presence,
Hmm.
but it wasn't like an approach of service. So I think the genuine desire to want to attend and care for a person's needs and to help create a supportive environment for them to realize um, their needs and desires is critical. And I think our society doesn't teach that
Hmm.
or help create that.
Or
I,
it
I think
creates the
there's
conditions for things to be so scarce
mhm,
that, yeah, for a more anxious person, very often they are attending to needs out of that fear
uh-huh,
as
yeah,
opposed to out of being big enough in themselves
mhm,
and secure enough
yeah,
to be able to say, hey, it's okay if you don't reciprocate because you can't right now. And also, it will be okay for me to walk away from this relationship if you never reciprocate,
mhm,
even when you could, you
yeah,
know? And for the avoidant, again, it's like if you can't even interocept because you are so shut down and
mhm,
your default mode is it's kind of every man for himself.
mhm,
And it's like pretty magnanimous of me to be doing anything
yeah,
more
yeah,
than then again it's out of a different kind of fear that is just being
mhm,
fortified and really guarded and self-protective, that you are actually controlling the relationship by being the provider.
right,
And so the flip side again is like actually wanting to be known and
mhm,
actually wanting to know the other person and then taking such delight in what you know about them that it's like, oh, that's going to be an arrow that lands deep for them. I'm going
mhm,
to move towards and I'm going to
mhm,
touch, or I'm going to attend, or I'm going to let them know I'm tracking you
mhm,
because this thing has happened or you're going through this, etc. So
yeah,
that thing, that question of can you actually trust is like sort
mhm,
of a two-part thing. You are giving somebody a chance to develop that capacity.
mhm,
But we did this religiously for a year.
mhm,
It took some time
yeah,
for us to be able to really discern, can I trust this person?
mhm,
And then to proceed as though like, okay, then this is I'm going to trust that when they can, they will. And then when they would sometimes, it was like, okay, so now it's my work to receive that and
mhm,
not be like, yeah, but are you going to do it again later? Yeah, but you're
mhm,
not consistent enough. It took us a few years
mhm,
to really develop that trust into a felt sense and a new like interpersonal neurobiology where
mhm,
not meeting the need now becomes kind of surprising.
yeah,
It's like, whoa, my partner must actually be really like going through stuff right now
mhm,
if they missed this thing
mhm,
for that was important to me, or
mhm,
whatever, It's just like but it took a few years
yeah,
of doing this ritual. And we did have some pretty delightful signs
mhm,
of things. Like I think it was like in the third month or something, we went out, we'd done our ritual and we went into the backyard. We decided to have a fire and we were throwing moonshine on it.
mhm.
And so the fire was going, we threw the moonshine on, and that would create this like huge, what would you even call that? Like
Fireball.
a fireball up into the sky. How many feet? Like
10 feet.
10 feet
Yeah.
in the air, like whoosh,
Yeah.
very dramatic. And right after we did that, an owl came down
Mm.
and alighted on the fence post, like how many feet away?
Yeah, 20, 30 feet. 30,
Yeah,
yeah.
very close.
Yeah.
And what animal would actually like fly towards the flames?
Uh,
Like it's pretty rare. And it sat on the fence post and it just looked at us and we were both like, oh my God.
mm,
Like, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And the owl had already been, we, collected feathers and it had already been kind of a important totem for our marriage. But that
mhm.
was like, it really felt like the owl was like, yeah, the moon hears you.
Yeah.
Like the moon is working on this and we're protecting you and we're holding you. And I really did feel like, the pieces that you where you couldn't meet my need and it still wasn't. I really was like, okay, and now I'm giving it to the moon. And it did deepen my relationship with the moon
Mm,
for sure, where I did feel like that kind of oceanic quality of maternal care
mhm.
that
Yeah.
was like very sustaining while I was like waiting for, can I really trust
Mhm.
that he really gets where my wounds of patriarchy are coming from and how they're
Mhm.
showing up? And I would say, and now I trust that.
Yeah, so it really was sort of it was a deepening, like we'd already spent years working on safety, um, and yet it still wasn't, it hadn't reached the level it needed to be. Like the sense
Hmm.
of safety in our relationship had not reached the level that it needed to be.
Hmm.
The sense of attachment in our, of presence in our relationship had not reached the level it needed to be.
Yeah.
So we genuinely wanted to be there. We knew all the things. We were communicating, like we had alignment on the politics
We
around.
loved each other.
We crazy
There's
about each
nobody
other.
else we were looking at. I was
Yeah.
never like,
Yeah.
oh, maybe somebody else would make me happier.
Yeah, no, we're crazy about each other.
Yeah.
But we hadn't reached the level we needed to be. And it, so this ritual was like, it was a lifeline that kind of kept us from screaming inside our own heads.
Or drifting away,
Yeah.
like even worse,
Mhm.
right? The apathy.
Yeah.
It was the lifeline that tethered us to each other
Mhm.
so that we didn't just float off and dissolve into something else.
Yeah, and it did, like it was, I don't know. It's hard for me to explain this, but it's hard for me to understand it, I guess. But it did allow and create a deepening,
Hmm.
So, you do feel more safe.
Yeah.
I do feel more attached,
Hmm.
you know. Um, so it created space um and practice, love is a verb.
Hmm.
You have to do it. You don't just do it once and then it's done. Like if we started drifting apart now, we would feel it,
Oh, yeah.
and our
It wouldn't
old,
get far.
yeah, our old avoidance and attachment would flare up,
Yeah.
and so,
And we'd be like, we have to deal with this.
yeah, it's not like we fixed ourselves, 10 years ago and now we don't have to do anything more. It's like, no, we do daily practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Now we're much more, it's woven
mhm.
into the warp and weft of our
Yeah.
relationship. And yeah, so the great thing, what we're always looking for in any therapeutic intervention is that the symptoms are less acute, they have a shorter duration, and
Mhm.
they're less frequent,
Yeah.
right? And I would say all of the symptoms of attachment wounding are exactly that.
Mhm.
We we don't have days and days of resentments building up or
No.
like unresolved, unattended. There's so much more that's happening very quickly because we have a fundamental trust that like
Mhm.
it's okay for me to share this person wants to know, and I also want to know what
Mhm.
is going on with you, what's happening. And so there's a lot less. For me, my default was futility.
Mhm.
There's no point in telling him because
Mhm.
I know exactly how this conversation is going to go, and there's a lot less of that.
Mhm.
And so I think that speaks to the trust that was built by just, you know, there's still probably stuff on the lists if we went and looked at
Mhm.
them again
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
either never happened or they just didn't matter
Mhm.
anymore.
Yeah, the urgency really shifted on a lot of things.
Yeah, for sure. And it was really good when it was a lifeline while all the needs weren't being met. But I knew that you knew
Hmm.
exactly what was up and what was needed.
Hmm.
And you knew that I knew
Yeah.
exactly what was up and what was needed. And I could feel in myself too, like that sense of I want to solve this problem.
Hmm.
I want to be close. Once that inner desire for me
Hmm.
came through, well, the big thing with sex, of course, for me, I shared earlier how astrology is my religion, so is astro magic. It comes
Hmm.
right into it, so my planetary worship. And I was like, you know what I could do is I could include Ruben in my planetary magic and my planetary worship. And so, including you and being like, okay, Ruben, on Friday we worship Venus, and this is how I want to be worshipped sexually. And you were like, yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
And, and so on and so on.
Hmm.
And I think you being willing to participate in the language that I use
Hmm.
to communicate with the greater benevolent powers through the ritual of the marriage moon, that meant a lot because it was like not just a gimmick. It was not just a thing that you were like, see, I tried and it didn't work and you're still not meeting my need.
Hmm.
You were committed, right? Like
Yeah.
this is a life way. It's not
We're all in.
we were all in, and it wasn't just a thing we did once. It was like a
Hmm.
ritual we did together, which is kind of like imagine if you married each other every month for the rest of your life. It's like this is what we're gonna do, and we're recommitting every full moon. That's a magical practice,
Hmm.
and you were in it, and then I felt like, okay, I can trust him to let him into my other magical practice, and maybe that will also meet some of his needs
Hmm.
and we could do this together and it feels really beautiful for me.
Hmm. I just want to sidebar again into communication. We diss communication therapy a lot.
It's
Uh,
just it's what do you call it?
well, it's the information deficit model. So the
Mhm.
idea is that there is specific information that the other person doesn't have.
Right.
They are lacking.
And if they had it,
And if they had it, they would transform into completely different people. But, as we started by saying, it's like actually a lot of the time the communication is about really surface level stuff that doesn't get to the deep roots
Mhm.
of the mismatch, the
Mhm.
attachment wound or whatever.
A lot of times the communication can be really excellent, but your nervous system isn't
Yeah.
functioning any differently.
Yeah.
And so the signals you're sending and your behaviors are not necessarily totally in alignment
Hmm.
with what you think you believe.
Yeah. And so we were, we knew all that and we were still in that where it's like the only thing to do is to just keep repeating yourself like
Yeah.
over and over again, so that hopefully sometime, they must not be hearing you. They must not
Yeah.
be understanding you, use different words, etc.
Yeah.
And so this was like, no, we
We've
have
got all the
heard this
clarity. Yeah. Yeah.
and now we're not going to talk about it again for another month.
Yeah. We're gonna
So,
just say it
yeah.
clearly as a need stated.
Yeah.
It's there.
Yeah.
We don't need to editorialize.
Yeah.
They are clear.
Yeah.
And we've tried all the strategies. We've tried all the problem solving of, oh,
Hmm.
how can we both? It's like, no, no, no. What do the Gottmans say? It's like over 70% of the arguments are totally intractable and unsolvable.
Right.
And it's like,
Yeah.
so how then are we going to proceed
Hmm.
with our needs, which actually are in direct opposition? And we're experiencing, okay, so why are we talking about moving to this land and the duress? It's because sometimes what we're finding now is the thing that is my need that would make my life easier would make your life so much harder, and vice versa. You're like, I would like this thing to happen. And I'm like, wow, that would make my life so much harder. So we have these needs that it's not that they're opposing, it's just that they're in this like really tragic yin yang kind of situation of like, if I want this thing, it's gonna just create so much work and so much more stress for you. And if you want this thing from me, it's like, oh my God, what am I gonna do with all my stuff I'm supposed to do? So
Hmm.
here we are once again living life in not a peaceful way, not an easeful way. In fact, not only is the labor ratcheted up, the emotional labor
Hmm.
ratcheted up. We're like intergenerational living with a lot of, again, unresolved emotional material, unacknowledged neurodivergence, untherapized, challenges. All of this is actually cranking up for us. And some of the things that would solve it would just be even harder for our partner. And so once again, we're in this unsolvable problem. And I'm so grateful we did the ritual of the marriage moon for so long to really feel in our bones, in my marrow, I feel that where my need isn't being met, it's a can't do problem, not a won't do problem. It just makes such a difference when you don't have that question of like, am I respected? Am I seen? Am I cared for? Am,
Well, and actually
yeah.
believing it in your bones. Like
Hmm.
that's the part, right? Is
Hmm.
that like there's all these thoughts. We think about things, we know these things, but to feel it in your bones that it's like this person actually wants me to be happy,
Yeah.
wants me to be cared for,
Hmm.
wants to do things for my safety, security, pleasure, and enjoyment, you know.
Hmm.
So to actually really believe it and to know, as you say, that it's like this is a can't do.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Oh.
if our circumstances were different, we would for sure.
And what we saw, of course, is that this was a can't do right now. So,
Yeah.
you didn't start off by saying we're going to worship Venus.
Hmm.
That was something that came over time,
Yeah.
that took years to evolve.
Yeah.
Um, when you could.
Yeah, and life circumstances to change.
Hmm.
And it was symbiotic, right? It's like, oh, look, I have more capacity because I'm not the only person tracking
Hmm.
our family's needs, our parenting needs, our shopping needs, our food needs, like that kind of very gendered division of labor that was so invisible because you're a sensitive 90s guy, we were a very feminist couple, but it was still happening in such a way that it's like I did not have capacity. And over time, oh, look, what do you know? I was suddenly able to do it. And then I actually wanted to.
Hmm.
I actually wanted to. I was like, okay, this actually does feel like free choice now.
Hmm.
And now that it feels like free choice, I feel it coming back. That yes, I want to be worshipped like that. And yes, I have no problem being worshipped like that. I'll be your pillow princess, baby. So, uh, so that was our Hail Mary move,
Hmm.
was the ritual of the marriage moon. And there was no like starter, or there was a start time. There was no end time where we were like, we're going to do it this long. And if it doesn't work, then we're getting a divorce. But it was kind of in the background, right? It was like,
Well, and as a Hail Mary, the ball is still in the air. Like it's
yeah.
still flying,
Yeah.
that this is ongoing work
Hmm.
that it took years. Like it took months to start to feel the fruits, and it took years to really like settle into the full fruit bowl.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now we're in fruit salad. Like
Yeah.
the metaphor is wearing out here, but
Yeah, but we did start to see things getting crossed off. Like,
Mhm.
okay, this need is being met pretty immediately. And we both had some things
Yeah.
crossed off. And then life changed, and we didn't really need the ritual as much anymore because there was just trust. And we were able to be like, hey,
Yeah.
I have this need, just so you know. And the other would be like, okay, noted. Thank you for letting me know. And we didn't need to
Mhm.
ritualize it. It was like, okay, I'm aware of this and I am tracking this.
Mhm.
And I'm going to keep sending you bids and signals of reassurance. So it's like, I know this is
Yeah.
the need that you have, even mirroring future. Wow, you really have a need for this. And I'm seeing it like go unmet. And it's so painful for me too.
Mhm.
We can communicate that. And there's this genuine, like, oh,
We're communicating
care.
about the actual deep issues.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
which I don't know, maybe people that are raised with secure attachment styles, maybe that's how they
Maybe they
start,
do
is
it the
they're just
opposite.
like, yeah, it's like, hey, what's your deepest need? Let's communicate about that. No problem. But
I think most of us we always think we're communicating about our deepest need
uh,
until we actually get, pretty quiet with things. And then, oh, there's more underneath. Along the way, we also had built up more um, sources of support for our marriage outside of our marriage. So not just our couples therapy, but like you going to men's group, you going, well, first it was man beers. It was like one of my needs was you needed to make friends.
mhm,
And you did all kinds of things with that, and that's evolved into something else. And so there's just a lot more resourcing
mhm,
for
yeah,
our marriage. So here we are now out in the bush, and
mhm. Much
good,
more isolated.
much more
And
isolated.
yet,
Good thing we did all that work
mhm,
because we are very much in the fishbowl now
mhm,
of uh, other people who also have needs, who communicate certain needs, but they are not the underneath needs.
Yeah.
And the underneath needs are perhaps at this point, you know, unmeetable in some ways because they are inarticulable in so many. And it's hard to meet a need that is too big to talk about. But we've had enough practice with each other of sensing how we need to presence the secure attachment and being consistent
Mhm.
um, and that if they could, trusting that if the other person could do it,
Mhm.
they would, you know. So I'm so glad we did that work so that we could be here now and try to live intergenerationally with. It's like you and I are sandwiched between the um, challenged older generation and the challenged younger generation, and we're doing a lot of care.
Yeah.
A lot of people in our care.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing that I feel like we put the oxygen masks on ourselves first, and we're in each other's care first,
Yeah.
so that we can do that for other people.
Yeah, which is what Tacken says. Always we're the primaries.
We are the primaries. Yeah. And whew, it's so nice when we are outward facing. You know, you're tending to your parents, I'm tending to our child, or other things. You know, you're tending to the land, I'm tending to the income. That there's no doubt, there's no question that we are back to back, if not shoulder to shoulder, because we're putting out fires wherever we're attending to. But we don't have that additional layer of my partner doesn't have me right now, or my partner's not tracking me.
Yeah. We absolutely could not have done what we're doing now.
No.
So it's so funny that uh I feel like this has been kind of a rambling conversation.
It really is. It's just for us.
Yeah. But it's so funny that it kind of takes so long, and it's so hard for me to articulate this thing that I feel was really, really jugular. It was a process. It wasn't a thing. It wasn't a point in time, but this process that we set out upon, starting with the ritual of the marriage moon. And it takes a long time to try to circle around and really describe it. So that's why it takes a long rambling conversation.
And we've each had people ask us, like, about our marriage.
Yeah.
You know, say things like, you talk about your partner in a certain way, or like, I hear you on the podcast, and like, but how did you do it? And honestly, it's like, well, this is part of it. This is like, you can do all the things and it can still not work. And this is what we did when it didn't work. And so because of me teaching and you at men's group and stuff, people have heard like, oh, they do this ritual every full moon. And tell us more about it. What is this witchcraft? How can we do it? And you've written out pretty long instructions, and I've actually just sent that along to people who are like, please help me. What is the spell? What is the witchcraft that we can do? And it's like, literally, this is it. This is the spell. This is the witchcraft. And it really saved us. The other stuff needed to happen first. That was all necessary, but it still wasn't sufficient. We needed to have something for the throwing hands up in the air time. And through doing that, it enabled us to be the people we need to be, to now be like, okay, let's step into this situation that is going to be more needs of more people and put more pressure on us financially, time-wise, attention-wise. If we hadn't done that ritual of the marriage moon, I don't think we could do this now.
No, absolutely not.
No.
We really did create this escalating spiral of awesomeness where you felt safer and I felt more attached, and then you felt safer and I felt more attached, and you felt safer and I felt more attached. So it took time, but we just kept building it better, like, and treating that deeper need
Over and over and over again
over and over
until it was muscle memory.
Yeah.
And that it does. It just takes time and practice.
And
very consistent time and practice.
And that stair step of kind of experience, was part of the early resentment that we treated with the ritual in the first place, is that like we'd had these sips of water and then it wasn't fixed,
Mhm.
which created the resentment, which we addressed with this ritual. But
Mhm.
it's a spiral of improvement, like
Mhm.
a growth spiral of improvement.
Mhm. And I think the nice thing about having that ritual container is that instead of going, okay, that didn't work, let's try a different thing. That didn't work, let's try a different thing. That didn't work. Read this book,
Mhm.
do that article, do that training, watch that video, go to that couples retreat. It was like, no, no, we're going to keep doing this one very basic fundamental thing
Mhm.
over and over and over. And that's like
Mhm.
mastery, right? That's the
Mhm.
craft.
Mhm.
And that's how you become skillful at a
Mhm.
craft. We're working our basics over and over and over. And we had this beautiful ritual container
Mhm.
that that's how the efficacy came.
Mhm.
That's how we got good at it.
I hadn't thought about that sort of capitalist consumer angle
Mhm.
that is a lot of couples therapy.
Mhm.
That if that pill doesn't work, then buy a new one.
Mhm.
And whereas the ritual was a different approach.
Mhm. Yeah, worked for us.
Mhm.
So that's what we did, folks. That's it. That's
That's
the
it. That's
magic.
all.
That's what it is. That's all you have to do.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to be totally honest with you. Ruben and I had like a major blow up today, like a major argument. So I also, as I was editing this, I also really needed to hear this episode today, my friends, because the turbulent times just keep coming. Like today, Ruben is about to head back to our old house on the island in Victoria because his entire workshop, like all his tools, plus a ton of outdoor stuff, like our greenhouse and like some building supplies and a shed and our bicycles, like all that stuff is still there. And, we've given our notice. The developer is like breaking ground in a few months and we've got to get our stuff out. And yeah, so he's got to go back there and get it all out by the end of the month. And honestly, I mean, having heard this episode, as you can imagine, like purging stuff, getting rid of stuff is like not really Ruben's forte. And he's got to do it like all by himself. And it's so much work. And he's already so exhausted. And it's basically like breaking him psychologically. So having a massive blow up, like right before he's about to face this massive undertaking makes a lot of sense, right? Context clues, people. Chances of having a blow up are elevated. And it's just like a really elevated stress response for both of us. Like, I already packed and loaded two U-Haul trucks over, multiple months. The process has been like utterly exhausting. Ruben's at a breaking point. I'm out of bandwidth. And to be honest, like neither of us right now have the energy to be attuning to each other and like doing ritual together, much less finding time for like couple therapy. We barely have the energy to just keep putting one foot in front of the other. So, being very real here, aren't we glad we spent that 18 months or so doing the ritual of the marriage moon when we did have a teeny bit of energy for it? Yes. Oh my God. Yes. Like, yes, we needed to become the people that we are today in order to undertake what we are doing right now. Like, aren't we so glad we invested in that ritual so we can lean on it now and like let the blow ups happen and recover in motion? Yes. Like, am I so thankful to my past self for all the rituals and practices I've done to prepare for collapse times so that when I'm like right in the middle of it, I can stay upright and functional more or less? Yes. Like, oh my God. Yes, I'm so grateful to past Carmen and to past Ruben for doing that ritual so that we can survive when rupture happens now. And that's the thing about secure attachment, right? It's not that you are always harmonious, right? What makes it secure is that you can have a blow up and have a huge rupture, and then you can repair quickly. And you rupture, repair, rupture, repair, rupture, repair, and you do it quicker and quicker. Anyway, I'm so glad that we did all that stuff to prepare for times like this. And my friends, it's never too late to start to prepare, and it's never too late to fall on your knees and pray for help. It's never too late to ask the moon for mercy. So, to learn how, like step by step, hold your hand through it, how, of course, you can go get my book, Spells for the Apocalypse, wherever books are sold. If you want to buy from an independent bookstore, just ask them to bring it in. It's available anywhere books are sold. The moon is there for you. And many, many, many other resources too, which is why I say the book is very helpful. Okay, here's my little thing on Amazon. If you want to buy from Amazon, please do, and leave a review. I mean, people who know me, people who've listened to the show for a long time, people in the network, if you went through like my first book launch, you know how I feel about Amazon. You know I give to the Amazon Labor Union every month because of how anybody listening to this, of course, we feel pretty similarly about Amazon, but also class consciousness, people, right? So if you got to buy through Amazon, no judgment here. I totally understand. But also maybe consider becoming a monthly donor to the Amazon Labor Union. Like even just something small, like a $2 a month thing is a ritual. It's a spell. It's a way to magically, energetically, and tangibly counteract the evil that is the existence of billionaires, right? So I'm going to link to the Amazon Labor Union in the show notes and think of it as a spell, less as like, oh, what's my $2 a month going to do? You know what? It's actually going to make a big difference to the people at Amazon knowing that customers are actually with them. And again, magically, it's the spell you cast for change. And honestly, like your Amazon purchase matters a lot to the algorithm that helps like-minded people and good-hearted souls to find my book. In the same way that like your review matters a lot to me and also to my publisher. And it matters that we support creative works that promote pro-social sentiments like anti-imperialism, anti-fascism, mutual aid, and collective care, like all that stuff that you're going to find between the covers of Spells for the Apocalypse. So let me thank this person who went by Anonymous on Amazon.com, and they left like a perfect review for my first book, The Spirited Kitchen. They gave it 5 stars, and they wrote, I love the information and the pictures in this book. So helpful with great ideas. A must-have for the kitchen witch! Exclamation mark. And that was it. And that is like literally the perfect review, right? Like this isn't like the New York Times where we're expecting a big long editorial. No, it's short, it's sweet, it lets you know who this book is perfect for. It probably took them like a couple minutes to do, but it adds to like my favorable rating as an author, and it bumps the algorithm towards other lovely people looking for a lovely book like The Spirited Kitchen. So thank you, thank you, thank you to that anonymous person. I super appreciate it. And if you're a Goodreads user, your review there is also extremely important. And so is your want to read vote. I was not entirely aware of this want to read thing, but again, the algorithm gets you in so many different ways. So I'm very amazed at how many people have clicked want to read on Goodreads for Spells for the Apocalypse. Like last week, I noticed like 2,000 people had clicked want to read, which is bonkers to me because The Spirited Kitchen only ever had like 200. And I like worked so hard to promote that. And whereas this book has had like, 2 podcast episodes, like 1 email, like not that big a deal. And then yesterday, I just looked and over 3,300 people had selected want to read. So like, that's a really nice organic way to spread the word among people. That's just like some algorithm magic just happened in 1 week. Like a whole other over 1,000 people somehow had it come across their screens. And, again, that's how we spread the word among people who move through the world in a similar way to us. And we're tracking similar things. And we're concerned about our collective welfare and well-being. So like, that's awesome. So if you have a Goodreads account, go on there, click want to read for Spells for the Apocalypse. And once you've read it, leave your review. Okay, last thing. There's an audiobook version. Now, I did not read the audiobook, and like I'm not going to get into how devastating that was for me as an author to not be allowed to read my own book. Live and learn. But let's just end on a good note here by saying I am so relieved to tell you that I did get to choose the voice actress, and her name is Colleen Marlowe. And honestly, her voice makes me want to get the audio version of my own book so that I can be like a passive listener and enjoy it. She has this deep, resonant, fierce, badass crone voice, and I love it so much. So, maybe do what I'm going to do and like get the book so you have the nice foil cover and you can like flip through it really easily, just like a handbook or like a user manual when the shit hits the fan. Have the book, but then get the audiobook and let Colleen Marlowe like coo at your amygdala as you fall asleep at night. Like, I'm totally going to do that. Okay, so I'm going to link to my books and websites, any references from this episode. You'll find them in the show notes, which you can see in your podcast player, or you can go to numinouspodcast.com. And if you'd like to learn more about secure attachment and the research around interpersonal neurobiology, the research that underpins the ritual of the marriage moon, you can take my on-demand video courses in the Numinous Network. I have 2 on attachment. One is called Secure, the magical art and subtle science of attachment. And the other one is called Contact Nutrition 101, which is about the building blocks of secure attachment, which consist of kind eyes, vocal prosody, safe touch, shared rhythm, and ingestion behaviors. And this is the topic of my next book after Spells for the Apocalypse on contact nutrition. So check out my website to learn all about all the offerings that come with monthly membership in the Numinous Network. You can come see me at carmenspagnola.com. CarmenSpagnola. Thank you so much for all your support. And until next time, take care.